Hey everyone, my name is Albert Fisk. I'm an artist from Stockholm, Sweden. In this video we're gonna take a look at the process of this painting you see behind me here. It all started a few weeks ago when an artist called Chkn Head sent me this message on Instagram. I've been following Chkn Head for many years now, and I've always wanted to work with him in some way, so I was super happy to see this message and instantly said yes. Since this was an art battle, the first thing that we did was to jump into a video call with all the artists and to get the theme and some tricky words that needs to be included in the painting. The theme was monochromatic, which I never done before, so I knew that right from the start it's gonna be a bit of a challenge. We also spun some wheels to get 3 random objects that needed to be included in the painting. The words were teapot, goldfish, and ice. My initial color that I wanted to go with when I heard the monochromatic theme was quinacridone magenta. But after getting the 3 words and the idea that started to build up in my brain, the color didn't really fit, so I decided to switch to this teal or turquoise color instead. I'm a huge tea drinker, so getting the word teapot was actually pretty good for me. I never painted it before, but I always wanted to include the tea aspect in my work, so this was a great opportunity to do so. And since teapots are usually painted, I thought that the goldfish could be that painted artwork on the teapot. I was also planning on putting the eyes on the actual teapot in the beginning, or to make it iced tea, but I decided to move that so I don't have all the 3 words in the same area. Instead, I gave the big character some ice horns and an ice crown. The story that I came up with for my painting is that the big character is the king of tea, and his name is Tio Leaf. He has a deal with the moon because his tea leaves can only grow in moonlight. However, the king is a bit tricksy and he uses his fish tea to mind control the moon, so the moon will work for him for free. That also includes his stars, which is the star staff that I call them. And then the king has his little eels here that you see on the sides, which are actually based on a real fish called garden eels. But here, they're guardian eels. There's also a little story about the sugar cubes at the bottom here. But if you want to hear more about the whole story, you should keep watching the video. Also, in the end, I will read you a little nursery rhyme that I wrote for this painting. Okay, so now we have all the ingredients for this painting. Let's start with the process. For my painting surface, I'm using a 6mm thick MDF board that I primed with gesso on both sides. And then I also toned the side that I'm gonna paint on with a turquoise color. I always start with simple sketches and notes like this when I'm starting a new painting. If it's a more complicated subject, I usually do a paint study to figure out composition and colors. This time I did it in Photoshop simply to save some time. Then I made a pencil drawing on a piece of paper that has the same size as the MDF board. I felt that the painting needed to be raised up a bit, and a simple fix to that was just to cut off 1 centimeter off the top of the drawing. Then I did a test fit with the frame to see if I need to cut off more, but it was perfect as it was. To get the drawing onto the board, I used transferring paper between the drawing and the board. The transfer was done in 2 stages. First the background, and then all the details after the background was painted. I like to use a ballpoint pen since it's easy to see what parts have been transferred, but you can use any pen or pencil for this. Once I'm done, I check to see that the lines have been transferred and fill in any missing parts. I also keep the drawing attached to the top, but I flip it over to the back side while painting the background. That way it'll be in the right spot for the second transfer when I flip the paper back over. When it's time to paint, I move over to my painting area. When mixing my colors, I like to have the paint study I made earlier on my phone to try and match the color as best as I can. I don't do this with every color, but I find it very useful to eliminate any uncertainties when it comes to picking the right color. Since acrylic paint dries darker, I like to test the mix on a small piece of the board before committing to it. That way I can quickly make adjustments if necessary. For the background, I use a hard bristle brush and a blow dryer to speed up the drying time. I usually use thinned out paint to have more control, so that's why I have to do it in several layers. Once I'm done with the current paint mixture, I put it in a small plastic container. Spray some water on it and add the lid, and then put it in another box with a wet dishcloth in it. That way the paint will stay wet for weeks. Then I clean the palette and mix the next color and repeat the process for the whole background. This part of the painting is very relaxing, since I don't have to be careful or think about details, so I really enjoy this stage. It also gives me some extra time to think about the rest of the process. Some of the inspiration for this piece actually came from Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. I also got inspired by the smoking caterpillar that is in the story. Here I wanted to fade out the lines between the ground and the bushes using a filbert brush in a wavy motion. This created a cool effect on the ground, making it look like small sand piles. This was not planned, but actually a happy little accident. Most of this will be painted over, but it's still a nice effect, and I'll probably use this in future paintings. Another way I like to add simple texture to almost any subject is to use a toothbrush and splatter on some dark or light tones. Even if it gets painted over, you'll still have subtle details showing through. For the next layer of the sky, I'm using Golden's Open Acrylic Medium. This will extend the drying time of any acrylic paint. I like using this when painting mist, smoke, or any glowing effect. Here I apply it with a small round brush and then I smudge it out with an old dry filbert brush. Something to keep in mind is that you need to wait for each layer to dry before applying the next one. If you don't, you'll start removing the first layer. If you are very careful, you can still do a second layer while the first layer is still a little bit wet. I wanted the sky to be a mixture of a starry night sky, but also a water surface when you look at it from underneath the water. And to add some stars in the sky, I'll start with masking off most of the background with some tracing paper. Then I used my trusty old toothbrush and some white paint to splatter on the stars. This gives a more random look than if you would paint in every single dot by hand. I do, however, go in with a small round brush to enhance a few of the stars in the end. When the background is done, I do the second transfer, this time with a white transferring paper. For some reason, the ballpoint pen didn't really want to work properly on these lines. I assume it's the graphite that stops the ink to flow, but I'm not sure. I had to use a separate paper on the side to kickstart the pen every now and then. Once the transfer was done, I added a few coats of workable fixative to prevent the lines from smudging. The next step in the process is to start blocking in some of the details with a base color. I start with the fur and I try to get a sense of the direction I want it to flow. Since I'll be going over these areas with multiple layers, the base tone doesn't have to match the final tone. But I do like to put down a bright tone for the areas I want to pop more. Or if the paint is transparent, it's a good way to get a better coverage. This eye was a real struggle to get right, and I had to repaint it, but you'll see that further in the video. To paint the shadow of the furry creature, I started with a semi-opaque grey color to get a better coverage, and then I glazed a turquoise color on top of that. And here you see that transparent turquoise color going down, transforming that grey boring shadow into a more interesting shadow. I also add the color to other parts of the ground to create more texture. Next up is the highlight color, and I will be going back and forth with these tones until I'm happy with how the ground looks. These sugar cubes are one of my favorite parts of this piece, and they actually have a meaning to them besides being an obvious detail to a tea party. They also stands for that life is not always a tea party. Sometimes you fall and break,
but you can always heal and get back up. And you should never be afraid to ask friends for help. And here I'm back to blocking in more details with base colors. The background of the moon was one of the most difficult parts in this painting. In retrospect, I should have used a bigger brush with looser strokes, but it still turned out okay in the end, I think. I learned that it's good to use the biggest brush possible that makes sense for the current area. The moon was also a struggle to paint, so eventually I turned off the camera so that I could focus on getting it right. I always seem to forget that each painting has this ugly stage. The only thing to get past it is just to keep working on it and add more layers. Eventually, the painting will start to look good. But it can be a little bit disheartening from time to time. The moon looks better now, but there were still a few problems with the right arm and leg, so later on I just moved those down a little bit. Like I mentioned before, these eels are inspired by a real sea creature called garden eels. They live in holes in the seabed, and I thought they were perfect for the King's Guard. Rendering the eels were pretty simple. I just made a gradient from dark to lighter tones, and then I glazed it a little bit with different shades of turquoise. The bottom turquoise is more to the blue, and the top one is more to the green. Then it was just a matter of adding some details like the eye, some shading, some skin spots, and finally the highlights. And after that I added the bubbles coming out from the eels. And in my story, the bubbles add carbonation to the actual fish tea. Okay, so it's time to paint one of the most important details of this painting, the eye. And like I mentioned before, I had to repaint the eye since I didn't like my initial idea. So I thought I'd include that in the video to show that sometimes it's better to repaint something than trying to save it. At least that's how it is in my experience, so don't be afraid to make mistakes. And as you can see, I took the eye pretty far before I decided to paint it over. It kinda hurts sometimes, but once you get going, it feels a lot better. I'm much happier with this new design of the eye, and with these final scratch marks, I can move on to the next area. Which is another part I had to repaint. This time though, I liked the idea I had, I just didn't execute it very well. Luckily, I only had to repaint one leg, the middle one. I love this glowing effect I got going on the tip of the legs. That's another one of my favorite parts of this painting. Now it's time to get back on the fur, and I'll start with a layer of dark grey turquoise. Then I'll glaze in more saturated and dark tones at the bottom. This will enhance the glowing effect on the legs, but also blend in the bottom of the creature with the ground. Now that I'm adding the next layer of a more saturated and brighter color, you can see how the darker layers underneath shines through in some areas. This is exactly what I want, and I'll be going back and forth with different tones to build up the look I'm after. At this point, I want to start adding the base colors for the horns before I continue with the fur. I think this is the fourth layer of fur, but I still haven't decided on how I want it to look, so just try to follow the flow I established earlier. Here you see how I go back with a darker tone to create more depth, which also helped me visualize what look I'm after. And since I have an aquatic theme going, I decided that longer fur would be best to show some movement. So when going in with the next layer, I kept that in mind and made longer and wavier shapes, but also trying to mix it up with short and random strokes to bring more life and randomness into the fur. This next layer is a glazing layer, where I use a transparent dark turquoise. This will add more variety into the fur and also bring it more to life and give it a better 3D or realistic look. Taking a break from the fur, I wanted to focus on finishing the sugar cubes. I'm not using pure white here, but all the surrounding color make it look like it's super bright. I really like the tinier sugar trails that the cubes are leaving, and I was thinking about adding some small piles of sugar, but I think the cubes and the trails were enough. The teapot was probably my favorite object to paint, but I never really rendered porcelain before, so it took some time to figure out how to do it. It didn't turn out the best, but totally okay for a first try. I also never painted a fish before, so I first drew it on a tracing paper, covered the back with a turquoise colored pencil, and then transferred the drawing onto the teapot. It took a while to get the right look of the fish, but I eventually got there, and I'm really happy with the end result of my first decorated teapot. I will definitely include more ceramics in my paintings from now on, and probably more teapots. So it was time to render the horns, and this was yet another thing I had to repaint due to this being the first time I'm painting it. The details were too small and I didn't like the flow of the lines. So I took a step back, looked at it and analyzed what changes I should do. It's not a waste of time in my opinion, it's always more learning. The fur really starts to come to life once you add the very lightest tones to it. I'm not showing all the layers I added since the difference is so small and barely visible on video, but you get the point, I hope. I waited until the end to paint the arms since it's easier to not have to think about the arms while painting the fur. However, having some of the strands covering the upper parts of the arm allowed me to be more loose in the rendering in that area. One of my favorite numbers is 7, and I've included that in a lot of different ways in this piece, like the number of stripes on this picnic blanket. Let me know in the comments if you find anything else in the piece that has the number 7 connected to it. The last details I wanted to add to this piece were the stars, or the star staff as I call them. And I did most of the rendering off camera because I really needed to focus on these little star dudes. Here are some quick close-ups of the finished piece before I take it to the final step before we frame it. The last step before framing is adding varnish. I really love this step because it brings all the colors together, makes it pop, and just gives the whole painting much more life. Make sure that the painting sits for a few days so the acrylic paint can dry completely. You don't want to trap any kind of moisture underneath the varnish. That can make it crack and destroy the painting. As promised, I'm going to read you the nursery rhyme that I wrote for this piece. The rhyme has the same name as the painting. It's Fish Tea with the Moon by Albert Fisk. In a land long forgotten, in the ocean down at the bottom, there lived a king and his guardian eel, whom with the moon he made a deal. But the king was tricksy with his fishy tea. "Drink this," he said, "and you shall work for me." The stars said no, but the moon drank still, because he's very polite, but now very ill. He shines so bright and works all night, even his stars for they do not fight. So never trust a king in the sea, he will only deceive with his fishy tea.
Alright, that's it. The painting is finished. It was a big challenge for me, but I had a lot of fun and learned a lot of stuff with it. I'm really happy with this new approach to my paintings, with a lot more storytelling, a little bit of background, and yeah, it feels like a new chapter in my art journey. If you want to purchase this painting, it's now available at albertfisk.com alongside a bunch of other paintings, stickers, and prints. Also, don't forget to check out all the other artists. I'll put the link to the social media in the description below. And with that, I say thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!